in the chat, throw it up in the chat. What percentage of Malaysian households rent versus own? Do you have that stat roughly? What percentage of Malaysian households rent instead of owning, you know? Or have a rough idea or range? Maybe we could pull it up. Wow, about 60 to 70%. And that's they rent versus own, right? About 60 to 70%. Is that right? And may I ask why that percentage is higher? Like in the US, it's roughly about 1/3, about 35% of the American households will rent versus own. But it looks like here, roughly 60 to 70%. Is it because of the affordability factor and just housing costs? Got it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I've got some pictures here of some sampling of the properties that we manage here in Portland as well. So this picture here is of one of our high-rise, I think you call it strata management there in Malaysia, right? For high-rise buildings. One of our rooftop decks in downtown Portland. And then over here, we've got a portfolio of some examples of different asset class types too. So on the left, that's NV apartments. That's a high rise or strata management. The windward is a garden style, and a garden style property is generally 1 to 3 stories. And then Yacht Harbor Club, we used to manage. This is a mid-rise, and that's generally 4 to 6 stories. And then Ella Apartments, which we recently managed as well, is a mixed-use community and has both commercial, right, like stores and restaurants, as well as residential, like apartments and housing, right? So again, you got high-rise, you got garden style, you got mid-rise, and you've got mixed-use. Are those similar labels in Malaysia, or do they kind of differ a little bit in those types of asset classes? Feel free to throw it up, put it in the chat. Maintenance fees for high rise usually at what percent? Okay, that's a good question. We're going to talk about maintenance. Similar. Okay, great. So when I'm referencing that, sort of familiar. Awesome. When I'm referencing that, that's what I'm referring to. So again, high rise, right, or strata management. Garden style is that 3 to 5 story. Mid-rise is 4, 5, 6 stories, right? High rise is 7 above. And then mixed use is both like a residential component and then like a retail commercial component that's included as well too. And here's some pictures of some interiors. So we've got Asa Flats and Lofts, Enzo Apartments. These are all in Portland, Yacht Harbor, and then Ardea as well too. So you can see the examples of those interior finishes. So let's talk about the business services. Business services of Greystar, and it's not just of Greystar. You could take many U.S. property management companies, and there's a lot of similarities in the types of services they offer for it. But for ours specifically, as I mentioned, we're in 215 global markets. I'm up in the property management section here. Let me see. Okay, so property management, so roughly 215 global markets. We manage about 2,700 communities total. We also have that property management operations arm. And then we also have the investment management side. So we have it in a whole investment division with about $49.9 billion in assets managed, or 186,000 owned. We're also in development as well too. with roughly $22.6 billion in sponsored rental housing projects. And then with the development, we do the construction as part of it. So it's kind of all the different cycles of the real estate life cycle of a property is all within our company for it. And again, a lot of companies will do multiple sectors. They'll offer multiple services. Not all of them, but if it's related and if one side benefits another side, then that's something that's helpful, for the company as a whole. And then in terms of the different types of management, so we manage conventional housing. In the US, conventional housing is where people pay rent and it's not paid by the government. So it's not subsidized. The government doesn't pay for part of it. We manage lease ups, which is like a brand new property where you have to market it and fill up the property. So it's got a full occupancy. And then high rise, we also manage student housing too, mixed use that we talked about, affordable housing, which is the subsidized government housing where government will pay for all or part of it, and then senior living as well too for it. And then within our company, we offer multiple services. So one thing is if you've got people that have an interest in HR or marketing, but they want to find a niche that they can get into for a career, they can work in the property management industry, but do marketing, work in the property management industry or do HR, work in the property management industry and do finance, right? There's all those different related industries with that as well too for it. This is our nationwide footprint. So you could see I'm located here, Portland. And then, like I said, I grew up in Washington State here, Seattle area. But yeah, we manage in every state and then internationally as well too. So kind of broken up into 4 sections. You've got the North America, you got the South America, Europe, and then Asia Pacific as well. So like the Asia Pacific area, we have an office in Shanghai, China, Sydney, Australia, Tokyo, Japan, and then Melbourne, Australia. And then Europe, we're in the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Spain, Germany, Austria, France, Ireland. And then in South America, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Chile, and Santiago as well, just to name a few there for it. So it's really cool to see how other countries manage and like what their marketing mix is and things like that, because oftentimes it's very different, right? A lot of similarities, but also very different too. Any questions so far on anything that we talked about?
I think so far so good, Mr.
So far so good. Awesome. Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so awesome, thumbs up, thank you. Let's talk about U.S. property management company functions, right? So if we say, okay, what does a company do to manage properties? How do they support their property management professionals in the U.S.? So I put this chart together here for us. I broke it up into kind of 3 main categories here, right? So you've got the human resource management, you've got the operations and the data management side, and then you've got growth and business development as well. So if you look at a property management company broken up into 3 sectors, right? These 3 different functional functions. Within it, you've got sub functions, right? So for human resource management, what do you typically do in human resources, right? For any industry, it's the recruiting, it's the training, it's developing the operating procedures, right? For the property management professionals, it's the leadership and the innovation, right? Training and employee retention or keeping your employees has become a very big topic here in the United States. Not that it wasn't important before, but it's a lot of people have left the job market and retired. So we've got we're trying to train and hire and bring people in. So it's become a really big thing. The people side is always one of as not one, it's the most important side, of any business for it. And then if you look at the operation and property management, data management side, right? This is more like the execution side, right? So the use of the systems, the support divisions, like we talked about, the marketing, the training, the HR, the strategy, for it, and then executing into growth, right? So how do we grow the business? How do we grow the properties that we manage, grow the rents, right? Reduce the expenses, track performance, get feedback from our clients, from either the tenants who live there, the residents who live there, or the owners who own the buildings that are managed. Any questions on this U.S. property management company functions? Like I said, I'll give you a copy of this.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does this also include the facility management?
Yep. Yeah. So facility management would fall under the operations side, right? So your support divisions, because you've got your facility managers or your maintenance technicians. And I'll talk more. I've got a couple additional slides that talk about maintenance specifically as well too. So that's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, so we talked about the company. Let's talk about the individual property management professional, right? What does he or she do, right? Day to day, what are their responsibilities as a property manager? So probably a lot of similarities, right, with what a property manager would do in Malaysia. So generally, it's the resident client satisfaction, right? How the U.S. regulates the property manager. So Mawar, if you can expand upon that question, I'd be happy to answer it as well too. Just give me a little bit more of what you're looking for on that question. So resident and client satisfaction. So we've got, essentially two clients. We've got the client that we manage the building for, who owns the building. And then we have our residents, which are also our clients, right? And our customers as well, too. So the property manager is kind of the liaison, right? That we're ensuring we're getting the ownership objective goals met, but we're also supporting the resident, getting the resident everything that they need as well, too. Number two is asset protection. Okay. So what I mean by asset protection is how do we minimize risk for the property? And the point about maintenance was brought up earlier. If you have what's called deferred maintenance, anybody know what deferred maintenance is? Have you heard that term before? Deferred maintenance, maintenance that hasn't been completed yet. If you don't maintain your elevator, you could have an elevator issue, right? Which could be more costly, right? Or potentially hurt somebody or anything like that, right? So how do you protect the asset, make sure it's well maintained as well? And then expense control management, right? So, at the end of the day, the property manager is the one that's doing a lot of the purchasing, or they're overseeing the maintenance team that's doing a lot of the purchasing. So how do you control those expenses, right? To ensure that we're in line with our budget and we're not overspending and we're still getting quality. We're still, able to manage the property successfully as well. Number four is capital project planning and execution. So what I mean by capital project planning, those are those larger projects. Like, let's say if you're going to go through and add a parking lot, right? Or remodel or renovate the office area and add like a fitness center amenity there, or add a swimming pool, or renovate multiple apartments and upgrade the interiors. Those are all those capital projects and stuff that are done. And those are done to often add value to the property. When it gets to a certain point where, they're outdated, it costs too much to maintain them, they'll often look to renovate or do some extensive capital project work on it too. And then financial reporting, right? So that could be weekly, that could be monthly, that could be annually as well. Different key performance indicators, different metrics that we use to manage the performance of the property management. that's there is provided to ownership as well. And then lastly is the revenue generation in the actual asset management side. How are we maximizing revenue for this property and making sure our rents are high enough that align with market? Derek, let's see here. How much does a property management company charge client for a residential property? And is it one-time charges in the beginning or monthly basis? So good question, Derek. So question is roughly, and correct me if I have this incorrect. What does the property management company charge the client who owns the property? What fee do they typically charge them to manage the property? And general market fee that you'll see in the US is anywhere from 4 to 5% of revenue that comes in. And that's generally monthly as well. Now that could change if it's a larger property and brings in more revenue. It could be a smaller fee. If it's a smaller asset and brings in less revenue, it could be a higher fee as well. So that's a good question. Are you experienced in managing old buildings stratified with many defects? Yes. So we manage in our area roughly 70 communities in kind of the Portland area. So we've got what are called historic buildings that are mid-rise or high-rise. They were built in the early 1910, 1920s, right? Massively in need of renovation. Fortunately, we work with great clients that want to invest into the community, and we'll go through and redevelop those to expand or increase the amount of people who could live there, and help with bringing properties up to a higher caliber of safety and stuff like that. Because those older properties, you have issues like with earthquakes and everything, where if they don't have the proper reinforcement, it could be a safety hazard for all the residents in the area. So as those things are outdated, those renovation or the tear down and rebuild of either the whole asset or part of it is pretty common for it. So good question, Mawar. Any questions on the individual property manager functions? And again, this isn't for every single property manager in the US, but this is generally what you'll see. And just out of curiosity, is there anything in like what Malaysian property managers would do that's different than what you see on this list? Anything missing on that? Or maybe something that US property managers do that Malaysian property managers don't do? Awesome. About the same. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Ooh, question. Okay. So what makes the building categorized as historical, even if it's a residential building? Very good question. So often the municipality, so that could be the city or the county, will designate that property as a historic building. And oftentimes they'll say, hey, if you maintain that property, we'll give you a property tax credit and reduce your property tax liability for it if you can maintain that particular building. And their classifications are often based on the age of the property and then also the location of it as well too. So, and you could have a historical office building, you could have a historical residential in the US, you could have, historical government building. It could be all sorts of different building types. But it just depends on the city, the municipality that's overseeing that part of it. So good question, Amir. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about maintenance. So we had a question about that. We're going to talk all things maintenance here with everybody. So maintenance management, these are the key responsibilities of the maintenance team. Okay, so again, not every single one of them in the US, but generally this is kind of the functionality that maintenance is or facility management is generally overseen for it. So As I mentioned earlier, it starts with people. People is the most important thing. If we don't have people that are managing the facilities and managing the maintenance, we can't do the work, right? So the maintenance team training and the staffing side is a big part of it. And our industry is started to roll out, like internship and all sorts of opportunities where people can come out of high school and get into maintenance and start working their way up and everything for it as well too. And same with university and college and stuff. It's a great field to be in. And to know that technical experience side as well. And it's in big demand, especially here in the US for it. Facility and maintenance and curb appeal. Anybody know what curb appeal is? Could be just a US phrase. Curb appeal. Any ideas? Curb appeal. No, but maybe a different term, never heard of it. Okay. So in the US, it's a common term used for how appealing is the community from the curb, from the street curb, right? So if I'm standing on the street looking at the property, is it in rough shape and it's not maintained and I don't want to live there, right? Or is it well taken care of and it would be inviting and would make people want to live there, right? Because let's face it, if you're a prospect and you're looking to rent, I don't think you want to live in a dirty community that's not well maintained, right? On that. So that's what we call curb appeal. Like, what's the appeal of the property? How well is that maintained, right? So they're managing the facilities, the amenities, the equipment, the common area space. And when I say common area, I'm talking about, areas that are shared, the hallways, the corridors, the staircases, and then obviously the apartments as well too, and maintaining those. Expense control and capital planning. So your maintenance team is super important for that expense side, because often they're the ones that are purchasing all the different parts for repairs or replacements. So like, I'll give you an example, specifically knowing whether it's better to try to repair the dishwasher or the washing machine that's broken, or do we replace that washing machine and buy a new one, right? So they're able they should be able to make that evaluation. What is the better thing to do? Is it costly more to keep repairing it because it's going to continue to break, or should we purchase a new one, right? Making those types of decisions for it. And then they help maximize the asset value, right? Via revenue increase and expense reduction. So if your property is not well maintained, if your residents and tenants are not taken care of, they're going to move out. You're going to lose rental revenue, right? And it's all related in that sense. So I'm going to give you 3 terms. I'm going to throw it up in the chat. These are 3 categories of maintenance. 3 categories of maintenance. So we have preventive, corrective, and deferred. So 3 categories of maintenance. So preventive, corrective, and deferred. So preventive maintenance is we're going to maintain things in advance so they don't break. So I used that elevator example earlier. Every month or every year or every 3 months, we get the inspection done. We make sure everything's working properly. That's preventive maintenance. So the elevator is maintained so it doesn't stop working or break. Corrective maintenance, an example of that is the washing machine in the apartment broke. The residents' washing machine broke, right? So we have to go in there and correct it and correct the broken appliance, right, and fix it. And then deferred maintenance is when the maintenance should be done, but it's not done, right? So let's go back to that example of that washing machine. It's broken, but we don't have a maintenance person to go out there and fix it. So it just sits and it's deferred, right? It's generally not a good thing. Sometimes there's reasons to do deferred maintenance though. Like for instance, if a property needs to be repainted, the exterior needs to be repainted, but you can't paint it because it's the winter time and it's raining, you'll defer that paint work until like spring or summer here in the U.S. when the weather's better for that. So just want to kind of give you those three categories of maintenance because that's how we kind of base everything off of that. Okay, so question or comment: curb appeal for us in Malaysia, more or less like an area with lifestyle, such as guarded and gated community. Yeah, definitely. So curb appeal. So I think when you say guarded and gated community, those are what we call amenities, right? So if you have a property and it's gated, right, and you have a property that's not gated, one property has an amenity of the gate and the guard for it, or the security. The other one doesn't have it, right? So that's more of an amenity, whereas the curb appeal is how well is the property maintained, right? Does it need to be painted? Is the landscaping overgrown? Is there a lot of litter? Is there damage, on the siding, the roof, things like that? That's more of a condition, right, is the curb appeal versus the amenity. So I hope that makes sense. Does the team training using in-house source or outsource, and is it covered by the company for the training? Good question. So it depends on the company. Smaller companies will sometimes outsource to bring in a recruiter, right, to recruit potential employees. They'll often outsource their training because they don't have a training director or training professionals that are doing the training. So like our apartment association, like the National Apartment Association does training. There's online opportunities, there's virtual training and stuff as well. Larger companies with more resources will often do that in-house for sourcing employment, and then also for training as well too. So I hope that answers that question okay. Regarding the previous slide, property managers in Malaysia implement bylaws, meetings, and administrative management. Is this done in the US too? Good question. Yes, it is. So we have what are called homeowners associations, or HOA, right, or condominium management, where often those types of meetings are required, and those property managers will implement the bylaws, right? What are the regulations of that homeowners association, of the multiple people live in that association? They'll run the meetings and then the administrative management too. So that is one thing as well too. Understood. Do you have difficulty in maintaining a common property because the design of the building is not maintenance friendly? That's a really good question. Yeah, so it's called functional obsolescence. So it's a lot to say. Functional obsolescence. So if you've got a property where the function of what the purpose was is not good for today's standards, right? Then that's something that oftentimes becomes more expensive to try to maintain. So let me give you an example of that. You could have a property that doesn't have washers and dryers in the apartments, right? And instead has like a laundry room that's separate. And as more and more people are expecting washers and dryers to be inside the apartments and not be in a laundry room, that type of community, that's a functional obsolescence where, it would be something where if it's possible, reconsidering, hey, if we were to renovate this property or remodel it, how could we add washers and dryers to all those apartments and fix that, so we're not trying to maintain a laundry room of sorts for it, because we'll be able to get higher rental income and everything for it. So it really just depends on the situation. The design of the building, that could be something based upon what's the best use of like common area space. So if you've got like an amenity that's no longer being used, like let's say, I want to say 10 years ago, tanning salons were really, really important, popular amenities in apartments. But nowadays people aren't doing the tanning anymore because of the health concerns and stuff like that could potentially come from it. So, they'll remove the tanning booths, right, from the property and put in something else as well too. So again, I hope that answers that question. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about high rises and kind of the management with a high rise over a garden style or a mid rise. So what do you think some of the additional maintenance items need to be maintained in a high rise building that like a garden style 1 to 3 story wouldn't have? What are additional systems and things that we would need to maintain in a high rise? So like a 20-story property, what are some additional systems do you think we'd have to maintain in that type of setting? Throw it up in the chat or feel free to unmute.
Elevators.
Elevator, yep, good. What else? What about fire systems, fire sprinkler systems, right? It's one thing. What about HVAC systems? You call it HVAC, right? Malaysia, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Right, maintaining proper building pressure and temperature. What about your water systems, right? How do you bring water, ventilation, thank you. How do you bring water from, fresh water from down below and bring it up 20 stories, right? Do you have a pump, right, that does that? What else could be needed? You ever hear of a boiler system before? Anybody know what a boiler system is? Yes? Awesome. So boiler system, as what it sounds like, it boils the water, right? So when somebody turns on their shower for hot water, the boiler, generally up at the top of a high rise, will boil the water and then send the hot water down to the unit. But usually for hotels, yeah. Apartments too here, but yeah, thank you for that. And then also too, on the other side, you have chillers as well too. So you've got systems that actually cool the water down or cooling towers, right? And send it down. So that's something else too that a high-rise strata management type would have. Malaysia using water heater, shower, then boiler, then provide for the whole building. Yep. So using water heater. Are those individual water heaters in every apartment, or is that one? Okay. Yeah. So that's also common here too. Anybody ever heard of a lift station? Lift, L-I-F-T, lift station. Yep, heaters are common. And again, it's based on climate, right? So if it's always generally warm there, right? Here we have the opposite where it's always cold. So we don't have air conditioners for it. For high rise, we have rainwater harvesting. Yep, that's something too with the sustainability as well. So lift station can be in high rises, and that basically will take the sewage that from the bathrooms and the tubs, and then it'll pump it out of the building into the sewage system. So that's again another difference there for that. And then obviously on the outside, you've got the building envelope area, right? So ensuring that the windows, the siding, there's no cracks, everything's sealed as well. So again, those are some examples of some differences in the maintenance of a high rise versus like a garden style would have for that. Okay, so let's talk about the apartment turnover process. Okay, so generally process is very similar in the US. It's probably very similar in Malaysia as well too. So step one is knowing what the owner wants to do with their strategy, right? So when I'm talking about apartment turnover process, I'm talking about you manage an apartment and the current resident moved out. And before you have a new resident move in, you need to turn the apartment over or make it ready for the new resident or prepare it for the new resident to move in, if that makes sense. So in the US, again, we call it the turnover process or the make ready process. So step one is just knowing what the ownership wants to do. Some of them will want to go through and renovate before a new resident tenant moves in. So their renovation, they could put different carpet or different flooring in. They could upgrade the cabinets or the countertops or the appliances or the paint, right? Or they could just do a regular maintenance, what we call a turn, right? And turn the unit with the existing hardware that's in there already, right? So they'll clean everything, they'll make repairs where they need to, but they're not upgrading it, right? So just knowing that is step one. Step two, before the resident moves out, we'll conduct what's called a pre-inspection. So we'll go in there before they move out and then find out what we need to order. Is the refrigerator, at a point where we need to order a new one? It's going to take a couple of weeks to get out, so we want to get that order done ahead of time. What do we have to plan for? Do we have to plan for carpet repairs, right? And bring a carpet flooring company in to do that, right? So we can plan that ahead of time. And then the maintenance team can start the turn work or the make ready work of the unit right after the resident moves out, or the renovation, right? And then once they've completed it, then typically the property manager will go in and inspect the unit before the new resident moves in. And then once the new resident moves in, schedule follow-up with them to ensure they're satisfied, everything's working okay inside the apartment. So it's a 5-step process, kind of high level, tells you how do we turn over an apartment or make it, rent ready for people to come in. What is the time period for the defects liability period? Generally, there's no time period for it. Some governments will say if like there's no hot water in the unit, or it's a habitability issue or a safety issue, then there's a certain time frame that could take place. Generally it's the property manager within 24 hours has to start the repair process for whatever it could be. But those are for more extreme type cases. But like if it's like a broken toilet or something, obviously the goal is to fix that as soon as possible. But there's no time period per se for it. Best practice though is communicating with a tenant within 24 to 48 hours of getting the work order, unless it's an emergency, and then responding immediately as well. For maintaining each unit, does the management use in-house or outsource? Good question. Again, it depends, right, on the management company. Generally, the larger companies will have their own in-house maintenance team, right? And then smaller management companies will often more likely outsource that. But even if you do have your own maintenance team, sometimes it's better you do a cost benefit analysis. Is it better to have our apartment maintenance person paint the whole apartment, or is it cheaper and more effective or efficient for us to hire a painting company to come in to paint the apartment, right? Because they're faster on that. So that's something that cost benefit analysis is weighed. And again, going back to the expense control side of it. But good question. Thank you for that. Any other questions on maintenance? We're more than halfway through. For Malaysia, some management using maintenance, roughly 50 to 60% of management using outsource, and sometimes the owner, the unit find themselves. Yeah. So again, that's why I mentioned, people with those technical skills, they're in big demand, right? It's a good field to be in, whether it's maintenance or plumbers or electricians, things like that. The cost of repairing usually under owner or tenant. Very good question. It depends. So generally, if the resident breaks it, right? So if they break the toilet, right, and it's their fault, then we'll charge them. But if it's a defect, right, with something we gave them already, that's generally we cover that cost. Good question. Who paid the maintenance fee, owner or tenant? Again, if it's like a tenant's fault, they broke the door because they punched it, they were mad, we'll charge them. If the door, just because it was old, it fell off, right? We'll go in and we'll fix it and we won't charge. So that's kind of that criteria for it. Any other maintenance questions? Okay. In the US, does a parking maintenance? Yes, it generally is, especially for mid-rise and high-rise in the city, where you've got parking garages for it, because you need to manage and maintain the air quality and make sure all the ventilation is getting the exhaust out of the garage. And then also, too, we have some properties that have, they're called car lifts or car stackers, where you've got limited parking. So you actually have a system where a car can drive and then it's ramped up like on a stack, and then another car can park below. So it gets pretty complex with that. Swimming pools, we've got, communities that have both indoor and outdoor and hot tubs. Some are open year round, but that's something that the maintenance would manage those. How do you calculate the maintenance fees? Good question. So that example about the door, if somebody goes and they punch the hole in the door and it's their fault, we'll charge generally the cost of the door replacement, and then the time that our maintenance tech did the work for it. So generally it's not something that we generate profit off of or anything like that. It's generally just what the cost is to make that repair. Sometimes some companies will have operating procedures where they'll break it all down, so everybody knows what those costs are and stuff in advance. And that's especially important too when the resident's moving out, and then you have to add up all your move out charges. There is an interfloor leakage from above. There's no tenants or owner from the above who have to pay for the maintenance. Good question. So generally that's not the resident's fault where the water's leaking into. So that's something that the building ownership would generally assume in terms of costs and liabilities. So if you have like a pipe that's leaking a couple levels up and it's going into the units, that's not something you would go back and bill the tenant for because it's not their fault. Okay, so let's jump into maximizing revenue and asset value. Anybody ever heard of the 4 Ps of marketing? 4 Ps of marketing. 4 Ps of marketing. Anybody know what they are? Ooh, nice. Price, product, place. Great. Yeah, awesome. So, and one more, promotion. Yep. So exactly, you're spot on. I love the 4 Ps. I talk about this in the classes I teach all the time. And I like it because, there we go. Because you can use this framework for any type of industry. Doesn't have to be apartments, right? We're going to use this in terms of the apartment side, but I like this model because it can be adapted and used when you're troubleshooting and you're trying to improve business practices for any type of business that you have, right? And as you all had noted in here, the 4 P stands for people, promotion, product, and price, right? There's also a version of the 5 Ps of marketing where they also include place as well, place, PLACE. But for today, we're just going to talk about people, promotion, product, and price. So kind of high level, the people is the people, your employees, right? The people who work at the company. The promotion in a nutshell is generally the marketing, right? So it's the website, the online advertising, online reputation, prospect resident interface as well. The product is the unit quality. We talked about that turnover process for the apartment, the amenities, right? The curb appeal, things like that. And then the price is, the rental rates, right? Or the cost for additional things like that, right? Typically based upon a market analysis or a neighborhood analysis. And a market analysis is when you take a look at your market right? So you're competing properties in the area and see how much they're charging for their apartments, right, in comparison to yours on that. So just kind of high level. Is the Airbnb under the promotion? Yeah, I would say it's promotion. Yeah, I would say promotion. I mean, they're still using the same product, right? They're still renting the apartment from us, but that short-term housing would be something that would be more as a promotion. Good question. What is the percentage for marketing used by property management and real estate agents in the U.S.? What is the percentage for marketing use? Amara, if you can maybe expand upon that question, happy to answer it and stuff. I've got a couple of slides in here that might give you the answer though. So let's talk about each of those. So again, the most important one, whether it's apartments, at least in my opinion, or other business industries, is people, right? People is the big thing. Without people, you can't do anything, right? So ensuring that when you're hiring, they've got the industry knowledge or they're ready to learn, right? And have that willing attitude to learn. You could also do skill assessments right before you hire them. I noted what's called secret shops, right? So after you hire them, you send in a secret shopper, right? Or somebody who acts like they're going to rent the apartment, and then they evaluate their experience, right? So you probably have that in Malaysia as well too, and then reviews. Ensuring that the people have growth opportunities, right? Otherwise, they'll often not want to stay, right? If they can't grow and move, making sure that you're paying them what the market rate is, right? If the budget can afford it. And then also training as well too. So ensuring you've got a training series in place too. So these are all good practices, best practices to increase the value of the people side of the 4 Ps in the apartment side or in property management for it. And then product. So we've got product quality, we've got customer service quality, community amenities, need for renovation upgrades, and then system for continued maintenance and repair as well too. So product quality is, again, how well was the apartment turned? Was it turned? Is it clean? Is everything in good repair before the new resident moves in? When the resident has concerns, is the customer service, are they responded to in a timely manner? Are there issues resolved quickly? Community amenities, are all your amenities working? We talked about amenities, the swimming pool, right? The fitness center, right? If they have an exercise room, are all those in good condition and open and available? Is it time to upgrade the unit? Do we need to do a renovation, right? Or is it still good? And then do we have a system for continued maintenance and repair as well on that? And then promotion. So best ways to increase the value of the promotion side, or the marketing side, is the property appeal, right? So is the property in a condition where we could take pictures of it, right, to market it, to make it look good? What is the property reputation? Right. And this is becoming way more and more important. People are buying based upon reviews and online reputation more so than ever. So what is your online reputation? That could be on Google, or whatever rating system. Are you using proper online advertising? You can get into search engine optimization as well too, right? Or SEO. Partnerships and referrals, right? So that's that Airbnb comment, right? Would be a partnership that could be created to help promote your property. And then just knowing the evolution of marketing, where is it going? What are the new technology trends? This is changing so fast that it's important to stay on top of it, because if you don't, your strategy could be outdated in 3 months, right? Or 6 months or a year for that. And then last but not least is price. Is the VR technology widely used for online advertising in the US? Not from what I've seen. We've tried it before, actually, a couple of years ago. We had a property, we had an office set up. It wasn't all the way built, So people could go in and use a VR and do a tour of everything. But it just hasn't picked up yet, and I'm sure it will at some point, but just in my opinion from what I've seen. Now, the online tours and the virtual tours where people could go to the website and then go do a tour like they're inside the building and walking around, that's something that's very popular. But the headset side of it, not as much yet from what I've seen. Good question, though. Okay, then last one is price. We're about 2/3 of the way through for a time check. So I think we have until another 28 minutes, I think, right? We'll just go with that. Okay, so price. Any idea why you want to change your price last, right? So if you're going back and you're looking at your product, you're looking at your people, you're looking at your promotion, why would you want to change your price at the very end, the last part of it? Anybody know why? Maybe demand is increased. Yep, that could be part of it. What else? Why would you change price last? Do you think if your apartment was not precaution, could be, depends on market value. Yep, you're closer. So do you think if your apartment was in bad condition, it was dirty, things were broken in it, do you think it would collect a higher rent or a lower rent than an apartment that was in good shape and clean? Which one do you think would get more rent? One that's lower, right? Exactly. So you want to make sure that the product is in good shape, right? In good repair, cleaned up, right? Before you price, because if it's not, then you have to price it low and you're losing money. Does that make sense? Same thing with people, right? If you don't have people who are there to lease the apartments out and answer the phone, right? You could price it low, super low. And if nobody's there to rent the apartment, then you can't do anything with that, right? So you want to make sure price is looked at last in comparison to those other items, because you want to make sure you're optimizing all of them before you go and change your price, or especially reduce the rent on that. So local market survey, we talked about a market survey or a neighborhood survey, neighborhood analysis, market analysis, right? So when you're pricing, you're looking at your competitors in the area. What are they pricing their rents? Generally, it's either a whole dollar amount, right? Like could be $1,000, like that face rent, right? Or it could be price per square foot, right? So you could say $1.50 a square foot, right? Are generally the metrics we use for comparison. Resident and prospect feedback, right? So knowing that if you have people moving out because the rents are too high, or you've got prospective tenants that are like, I picked somewhere else to move because it was cheaper, right? Electronic rent level optimization. So nowadays, like with the airline industry and hotels, they have a revenue optimizer. It's an electronic revenue optimizer. So it'll price it based on supply and demand. So we also have that in the apartment industry too, that we use to maximize revenue. Managing your resident renewal management side, right? So when the leases expire, how long leases do you guys typically do in Malaysia? Is it 1 year, 10 months, 12 months, month to month?
Annually, per year.
Annually? Okay. Yeah. Generally, same with us, roughly a year. But you want to stagger those, right? When I say stagger, you don't want to make them all 1 year, because if you have 20 people all move in and they all do the same 12-month lease term, when their lease is up, they all can move out. Then you've got a lot of vacant apartments, right? So maybe instead of doing them all for 12 months, you could do some for 10, some for 14 months, some for 9 months. If it's student housing, that would be different, right? But just a regular conventional apartment, that might be the better way to do it. Okay, any question on the 4 Ps? And again, if you take anything from this stuff today, 4 Ps is one of the best concepts to know because it applies to anything. Helps you really troubleshoot any type of business situation. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so just a couple more categories, and we'll wrap up here. Let's talk about third-party management versus owner management, versus owner and manager. So everybody know what I mean by when I say third-party management? Yes, okay. So third party is when a building owner, let's say they own a 20-unit property and they hire me as their property manager, right? I'm a third party managing for the owner, right? Versus the owner taking, his or her building, the 20 units, and managing it on their own. So let's talk about kind of the difference between those two. Okay, so third party fee management model, right? So this is the general model for third-party management side, right? When you've got planning, you've got support services, operations, and the revenue stream, right? So for the third-party fee management model, this is, generally when they're planning this out, is like how many apartments are in the area? What does that market look like? Are there a lot of apartments that we can go in and manage? Are there not? An interesting stat to know. So roughly 36% of the US population has consistently rented, right, versus owned. And then of the rental properties that are available, private owners in the US comprise of roughly 74 to 75% of the rental properties. So the vast majority of rental properties are not owned by big companies in the US. It's owned by individual private investors, right, that have those, where they're renting their houses out, or they're, two unit apartment duplex, or, things like that. So again, the vast majority is people who own, and they just have a couple rental units, and then they'll generally hire a management company to manage those as well. So again, planning side, what is that market opportunity? If I'm a property management company, I do fee management, I manage for somebody else. What does that market opportunity look like for the amount of rentals that are in that area? Then support services, what are the services I'm offering, right? We talked about maintenance. Are we going to outsource that? Or do we have a maintenance team that does that? Do we have a marketing team that helps with the marketing, or do we outsource that, right? Rent collection, is that something where we pay a team to go out and collect, or we set up an online portal where people can come in and pay? Is collecting rent one of the support services? Yeah, generally, right? It'll fall in that accounting, right? Report generation and stuff as well too. Good question, Derek. And then the actual nuts and bolts, the operations, right? So again, this is where that people side is big. If you don't have people, or they're not trained, or they're not capable of getting the work done and stuff, this is where you could have those limitations on that. So the actual execution of the property. And then, as we talked about, 4 to 5 to 6% is roughly the management fee in the US based upon revenue. And again, it'll vary, right, from market to market, or larger assets will have a smaller management fee, whereas smaller assets will have a larger management fee, right, for it. Okay. Is there a mass problem, like when someone rents the unit and the person that rents the unit rents again to others and no legal documents? That's a good question. Generally, no, because when people will apply to rent, they'll often get a landlord verification where they'll go through and they'll contact the previous landlord or housing provider and get their rental history for it. It has happened. There's some communities that only screen based on like a credit score, so they don't include that landlord verification, so they may not catch that. But generally, it's not a mass problem on that. So good question. Okay, so owner managed business model. So if I'm an owner and I'm managing my own investment, right? These are generally the steps that I would look at, right? Just again, in my opinion, from what I've seen, right? So you're researching what are the best deals, the best investment opportunities where I could go and purchase a rental, right? Is it a single family home? Is it a 5-unit apartment community? Is it a 20 unit? Is it a 100 unit, right? What is my investment structure, right? Am I financing that, or am I bringing in partners, right, for that? And then in terms of acquisition, what does that acquisition look like? Is this something that I'm going to acquire this and then turn around and sell it, or I'm going to acquire it and I'm going to renovate it, right? Or I'm going to acquire it and I'm going to hold it for 10 years and then I'm going to sell it, right? And then going back to that construction renovation, after I acquire it, what am I going to do? Am I going to renovate it? Am I going to hold it? What does it need, right? If I do renovate it and I have to lease it up, how do I optimize those operations? And then disposition is when I sell it, right? So often, generally, most of the money is made, not in collecting the rents every month, but it's when you buy a property and then you sell it for a higher amount, right? Because you've kind of fine-tuned everything for it. I don't know about this. Does a credit score play a big role in renting or owning property in the US? Because I heard a lot about credit score. Yes, it does. Yeah, credit score generally is included in the screening for renting. And then for owning, yeah, it's even more stringent if you're going to use bank financing for it. Good question. So one thing I want to say to property managers, we work with different groups in all parts of the asset life cycle, right? So whether they're looking to purchase or wanting consulting for, hey, we're going to renovate, or what should the rents be, or they're selling, or they're leasing up their property because it's new, or they're renovating. Like we're involved with all of it, right? And that kind of goes back to this recession-proof industry with a lot of opportunities as well too. Any questions on this? Okay. All right, last section. So let's talk U.S. tenant landlord law. So some questions about this came up early on. And again, I'm going to share this PowerPoint so you have all the information on this. But basically, one thing I want to point out is since 1965 in the US, right, up to 2020, the population grew significantly. And the amount of renters went from back in 1965, 21 million households to 43 million in 2020. Still average roughly about 35, 36, 37% of American households were renting. And the reason why is because people were confident in renting because they had protections in place by the government to help them feel more confident and secure with renting, right? They didn't feel like they were going to move in and then their landlord or housing provider would take advantage of them, right? Which, it has happened, it does happen, not as much nowadays. It's an unfortunate thing. But that's the whole reason why a lot of these tenant protections or government regulations went into place to help protect the tenants from people taking advantage of them, right? Which is a bad thing. So on a federal level, right? So a question came up: difference between federal and state. What covers what? The Fair Housing Act in 1968. This was the kind of the foundation for renter protections in the U.S. So prohibits discrimination due to race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. Right. So race, color, pretty self-explanatory. National origin is where you were born. Right. Your religion. Are you male, female? Right. Gender. Familial status, do you have children? Do you not have children? And disability. So landlords could not say, no, you can't rent here because of your disability, right? As an example. So provided those protections, which, is a good thing, right? Really good thing. Then the Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed, right? And this basically kind of provided security for screenings, right? We talked about that credit side. So when people went and applied, they know what specifically was pulled from their credit. They could get access to the credit report that was used, and then also to what the criteria was as to whether or not their credit report would, deny or approve whether or not they could move in to the apartment as well. And then state laws. So state laws govern more of the practical, more of the day-to-day type side. of it, whereas the national federal laws are more of the bigger picture items. And I'll give you some examples of state laws. So state laws will have different requirements in terms of the condition of the premises, the timeliness of repairs. So like that question came up like, hey, how long do people have, before repair needs to be done? That's generally governed by the state, not the federal government. And then, in terms of safety features, right? What type of safety features need to be included, in the unit, inside the apartment as well, like smoke detectors, right? Fire sprinklers, right? Oregon is now considering making air conditioners a requirement because we had a really hot summer, right? And people died, unfortunately, and stuff from the heat. So those are all more of a state level, not a federal level for those types of things. Lease and disclosures, right? So typically your lease regulations are based upon the state. So like, for instance, in Washington state, where Seattle's at, you cannot sign a lease longer than 1 year unless it's, notarized, right? So that's like a specific Washington type item that, Oregon doesn't have, where you could do a longer lease, for it. The states will also say, hey, you have to disclose if the paint of this apartment has lead in it, right? It could be a potential safety hazard. Or if there's, potential for mold, right, inside the apartment that could grow and impact people's health. That's more of a state side. And then evictions. And when I say evictions, I mean evictions for non-payment, right? That's more state-based as well, too. So, if rent is due on the 1st, and they haven't paid, when you issue your legal notice to get them to pay, how long do they have before, they could pay it? The question came up about COVID's impact. So there's been what's called eviction moratoria that are put in place, right, that protect people if they can't pay from evictions. So that's something that's happened, but often, again, that's more state-based as well. Okay. How does a property management company avoid overdue rent? And how does a property management company deal with a tenant who is not paying rent? So you can avoid overdue rent by having good screening criteria in place, right? So if you've got a person, generally they've got like a lower credit score, or if they've got a rental history of non-payment, things like that, that could be a red flag, or that could be a concern for moving them in. You could also set up programs where it's an auto pay, where they pay, online, and they get a discount or something, right, for the auto pay for it. And then also late fees, right? So if somebody doesn't pay on time, if you charge a high enough late fee, it would encourage them not to, generally pay late again, right? Because they don't want to pay that late fee. So good question. So those are just some examples. Okay, a couple more slides here. Common tenant responsibilities. So not only does the landlord have responsibilities, but the tenant does as well too, right? So 3 responsibilities I listed here is the safety, the maintenance, and the activity reporting side of it. So first one is the safety, right? So if the resident sees, hey, we got an issue, my smoke detector is not working anymore, they need to notify, generally the housing provider so they could go in and fix it, right? Because that could be a hazard, right? Because if hopefully there's not, but if there's a fire and the smoke detector is not working, that could be a problem. So it's up to the resident to notify us, generally for those things. Maintenance as well too. So, you can't have a whole bunch of waste or debris, inside the apartment. So the resident has to maintain that, keep it clean, because that could create health issues for everybody. And then, activity. So reporting any potential activity, criminal activity and stuff, anything that could be problematic for the community is also, generally a responsibility of the resident as well. Okay. So 2 more slides here, we're all done. So increased regulation in select municipalities, right? So the city and state and the federal government kind of play a balancing act for the renter protections. So states will and cities will generally, base their protections based upon area. So oftentimes you'll have generally more renter protections in larger cities where there's more renters, right? And a lot of that could look like rent control. Anybody know what rent control is, or have you heard of it? Rent control. So it basically tells you how much you could raise the rent by, what percentage, things like that. And the reason why states or cities will do that is because if the rents are growing a lot faster than the wages are, then people can't afford, to continue to live on that or in that rental. So often cities or states will, create protections for that, or like the COVID protections, right? When COVID was, a lot more common, and a lot more hospitalizations and things like that. There were more protections in place for people who couldn't pay because they weren't working or they were sick, from COVID and stuff like that, where they wouldn't be, evicted or forced to leave their home because of non-payment as well. And then last slide I have, again, I'll give copies of this to everybody, is new development and affordable housing. So generally, affordable housing is housing that's provided whereby people with a certain income can afford it, right? So they'll generally say, okay, if they're making this amount of money, right, they're on the lower income side, how much can they afford in terms of rent, right? And then oftentimes the government will come in because they're paying a lower rent. The government will come in and subsidize or cover that remaining amount that the building owner would normally get if it was renting like a full market rent, right? So let's say if the market rent was $1,000 and this was subsidized housing, they only had to pay $600, the government would pay the remaining $400, right? So it's a much needed opportunity for new development for affordable housing, where local governments working with the private sector to build affordable housing is something that is a big issue over here in the U.S. And is something that needs to be done. And they could create all sorts of funding incentives by giving like tax deductions, right? Giving development incentives where they'll reduce the cost of some of the fees and stuff as well too. They could give a bond, right, and help finance the projects, for it. So there's all sorts of different incentives that cities and states could do to encourage the development of more affordable housing for people on, those lower incomes based upon the area. Okay, well, I said a lot. Questions and answers. Okay, so for a new building, does the ownership is to the developer or the U.S.? From the U.S., there will be a private owner for the buildings. Because in Malaysia, the building usually is ownership by developer at first and owned by units from buyer. So is the question, so the building is owned by the owner of the building, and then the units are purchased individually and owned individually? Is that the question? Okay, so yeah, so those are, we call those condominiums, right? So you could have like a high-rise building, and then each unit could be purchased by an individual buyer, as you mentioned there, and then they own the unit, and then they have what's called a homeowners association that manages all the common space of the building. So the elevator and the hallways and the maintenance, right? And then they'll pay the HOA or the homeowners association dues or fees to a management company that oversees that. And then, you'll have a ownership group that owns the common area, and then all those individual units, right, could be sold. So those are called condominiums. So good question. What other questions do you have?
Thank you very much, Sir Just Similar. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing sharing. Attention to all participants to fill in the attendance link provided in the chat box. Now I'm honored to invite Sir Jesse Miller to answer some questions that were sent during the through YouTube Live during the talk. So the first question we got is, what are the real skills or competencies you look for in recruiting your staff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say having a good, positive work attitude and wanting to work hard is the most important thing when we're recruiting. We're bringing in somebody new because you can't train somebody to have a good attitude or a good working ethic. You could train people to learn the technical parts of the job, right? But you can't train them to have a good work attitude. So when we're hiring new, I would say that's one of the most important things that we look for, especially too if people are new to the industry. Like let's say they just got out of university, they just graduated, whether their program was property management or something else. They're new to the industry. If they have a good, strong work ethic and a good working attitude, we could train them to do anything.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope that answered the question. And moving to the next question, how difficult or easy to maximize asset value? Could you share some tips?
How difficult is it to maximize asset value?
Yes.
Okay, good question. So going back to the 4 Ps, that's something to use, whether it's apartments or anything, but ensuring that you go through that checklist, right? You've got the right people in place, they're all trained, right? You've got the right product, right? So the apartment is turned over and high quality, it's in good repair, it's clean. We talked about curb appeal as well. We talked about marketing, right? Knowing the marketing side of it, having a good maintenance team that's controlling the expenses as well. If you have all those different pieces, it's like like ingredients, right? When you're baking something, baking a pie or whatever, when you have all the right ingredients in place, you're going to maximize the rental rates that you're going to get, from the market. If you don't have those pieces in play, you don't have the right staff, you're not turning the apartment over so it's high quality, you're not marketing it properly or promoting it properly, your rents are going to be lower, and you're not going to maximize the value of the property.
All right, thank you, sir. And maybe this is the last question we got. In your opinion, what is the biggest demand in real estate right now? How does the US government ensure that those needs can be met in timely manner?
Can you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
In your opinion, what is the biggest demand in real estate right now? And how does the United States government ensure that those needs can be met in timely manner?
Got it. Okay, good question. So biggest demand in real estate right now is affordable housing, and that's why I included that section. The need for affordable housing is massive. It's increasing every single year exponentially, and it will take state and city government officials to work with the private industry to partner to build more affordable housing. Because the federal government can't do it on its own. It's too expensive to build that much housing. So more partnerships need to be created between the city and state, at the city and state level, with the private industry to build more affordable housing. But the cities and the states have to give the tax discounts, right? And offer incentives to help build that affordable housing. Otherwise, they'll build housing that's not affordable. They'll build it just market, standard, rents that don't provide housing for people at lower incomes. So I hope I answered that okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. And next question, what are the difference between property management, facility management, and asset management? Yeah,
great question. So property management, at least in my opinion, you could get differing answers from others, but property management is more of a focus on the day-to-day, the operational side of management of the property. Facility management is more so a focus on specifically the maintenance side of it, right? The facility management side. So the machine systems, the equipment, the common areas, the apartments, the parking area, the swimming pool, stuff like that, right? Asset management is generally, we'll be the property manager, and the asset manager is generally the representative of the owner, right? So they'll work more so on the financial side, the investment side. Are they going to achieve their ownership goals, right? But at the end of the day, all three of us are a team and work together to maximize the value of the asset, and protect and enhance it, and also make the best experience for the residents as well too who live there.
All right, thank you, Sir Jesse Miller, for your willingness to answer the questions posed by students in the chat box.
Yeah, and I've got my email up. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd love to know any of the differences between, the Malaysia property management, what we talked about. My LinkedIn's on there. Feel free to connect with me. I'm hoping I, get to see some of you or all of you at some point in person. And again, I'll share these PowerPoint slides. And I think too, there might have been a cap on the amount of participants. So this will be recorded. So anybody who was unable to join will be able to watch it and stuff as well too.
And I got the last question from Amarishad. Is there any chance to work with Greystar, even soon to be graduates from Malaysia like us?
Heck yeah. We don't have property, and I can't speak for Greystar Asia Pacific, but we don't have anything in Malaysia yet. But like I said, the growth opportunity is huge. And there's just tons and tons of development and need over there. So and even if it's not in Malaysia, it could be elsewhere. As I mentioned, we're in 16, 17 countries. So feel free to reach out. My Portland State University email's up there. Please keep in touch. And like I said, I'm hoping to be able to learn from you all too, about Malaysia more and your property management sector, and keep in touch with everybody. And again, thank you so much for this awesome opportunity to go over all this stuff and talk about property management.
Okay, finally, we come to the last part of our webinar. Before we end our session, I kindly ask all of you to open your camera and join us in capturing this moment.
Nice. Picture time, right?
Yes, picture time. Sir, maybe you can stop sharing so that we can get
oh, sorry.
Yeah, the whole participant.
Okay, so I will take the picture. So everybody ready? Okay. I hope everyone can open their camera. Okay, I will go to the first slide. Okay. Get ready all. Okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, another one. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, everybody. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day.